Hello anatomists at large. Today we'll be covering Objective 8.2, which covers the muscles of the tongue and soft palate and their actions and innervations. It's important to remember that the muscles of the tongue, while they have their individual functions, never work alone. However, in general, the extrinsic muscles alter the position of the tongue, and the intrinsic muscles alter its shape. The intrinsic muscles are confined to the tongue and do not attach to any bones. The extrinsic muscles originate from bony formations outside the tongue and then attach to it. Let's take a closer look. There are four extrinsic muscles of the tongue: the genioglossus, the hyoglossus, the styloglossus, and the palatoglossus. All of the extrinsic muscles of the tongue are innervated by cranial nerve 12, except the palatoglossus. It's innervated by the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve innervates most of the palate muscles, so you can remember that the palatoglossus has the same innervation as the other palate muscles. Now for the intrinsic muscles. There are also four of these: the superior longitudinal, the inferior longitudinal, the transverse, and vertical, so named for the direction of their fibers. These muscles are all innervated by cranial nerve 12. Nice and simple. Now let's look more closely at the innervation of the tongue. We know that all motor innervation comes from cranial nerve 12, with the exception of the palatoglossus. Now we'll divide the tongue into two sections, the anterior 2/3 and the posterior 1/3. The posterior 1/3 is easy. Cranial nerve 9 does general sensory and taste here. The anterior 2/3 has two different nerves for this. The lingual nerve, which is a branch of V sub 3, does general sense, while the chorda tympani, which is a branch of cranial nerve 7, does taste. On the posterior portion, there is a small area just anterior to the epiglottis that receives some innervation from the vagus nerve. It helps with some taste, but mostly general sense. Lastly, let's look at the muscles of the palate. Keep in mind, in my drawing, I had to remove some of the muscles on one side to show the ones beneath it. Okay, the palate muscles move the palate so it can elevate to seal off the oral passage from the nasopharynx, like when swallowing, or depress the palate to seal off the oral and nasal cavities when you're breathing through your nose. The five palate muscles are the palatopharyngeus, the musculus uvulae, the tensor vellae palatini, and the levator vellae palatini, and the palatoglossus. Now I know what you're thinking. Megan, you just said the palatoglossus is an extrinsic tongue muscle. I know, it's annoying. Although more is listed as both a tongue muscle and a palate muscle, it also says that the palatoglossus is a palatine muscle in function and innervation rather than a tongue muscle. So it sounds like Moores needs to do a little soul searching, but for simplicity's sake, think of it as a palate muscle. In terms of innervation, all the palate muscles are innervated by the vagus nerve via the pharyngeal plexus, except the tensor vellae palatini, which is innervated by V sub 3. Sensory to the palate is provided by a branch of the maxillary nerve. That's all for 8.2. Thanks for watching.